Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm very grateful to be here today with Christine Sun Kim and Jerome Ellis. And first about myself, I'm assistant curator at Haus der Kunst and curator of the exhibition Every Life Science by Christine Sun Kim. And the exhibition is still on view until 23rd of August. And also to give a little description of myself, I'm a white woman in the early 30s, and I'm wearing a plaid shirt and I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf because I'm in the office at Haus der Kunst. Yeah, and I'm, as I said, very honored to be here with Christine, who has the exhibition on view here right now, and Jerome, who has just been recently Tune resident. Tune is a sound program that is curated by my dear colleague Sarah Miles, who's also here with us right now. Yeah, and so Sarah Mice will also give a little introduction, and after this, Christine and Jerome will have a conversation, and I will, in between, yeah, maybe raise some questions addressing shared interests or maybe also themes they can both elaborate on. And I should also mention that this conversation will be soon available on our website of Haus der Kunst, and also in German Sign Language. So we will have both an ASL version and a DGS version of this conversation. And after Jerome and Christine will be in dialogue, there will be also the chance to raise questions. So there will be an Q&A open to the audience. Yeah, so I'm very delighted to have you all here, and to give a little introduction of Christine. Christine is an artist who is using drawing, painting, performance, and video to explore how sound is operating within society. And she's developing conceptual and multisensory compositions by combining American Sign Language with musical notation and English written language. And she has been exhibited yeah, internationally, and most recently at the Queen's Museum in New York, at Haus der Kunst in Munich, at the MMK in Frankfurt, at the Manchester International Festival, at the MIT List Visual Arts Center in Cambridge, and the Whitney Biennial in New York, among many others. Yeah, and now I'm very happy to hand over to my colleague, Sarah Miles.
Sarah, you're still mute. Please unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thanks, Eleanor. Just to give a quick description, I'm a white woman in her mid-30s with blonde hair, and I have a white t-shirt on. I'm here to introduce Jerome Ellis, who I had the pleasure of hosting and presenting in Munich just a couple of weeks ago. Jerome is a composer, a producer, a multi-instrumentalist, and also a writer. He's written compositions for theatre, and last year in 21 he released his debut solo album called The Clearing, where he used his sound and text and written word to explore the connection between Blackness, disability, divinity, time, and also nature. He gave two very beautiful and very intimate performances in the museum, in the auditorium space, where he played the saxophone, the dulcimer, the piano, and also used his own voice. And I'm very excited to see the conversation that unfolds today with Christine Sun Kim. Jerome's recently presented work at the Shed in New York, actually just this weekend gone by, at Haus der Kunst in Munich with us, Red Cat in Los Angeles, Issue Project Room, where he was an artist in residence for a year, Lincoln Center Theatre, and the Poetry Project in 2020, among many others. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so I would now officially start the conversation and maybe start with the first question. Yeah, that will bring me to the relationship between musicality, space, and writing, or you could rather say within writing in your practices. And yeah, that maybe like the audience who is not so familiar with your practices, yeah, gets a better understanding. It would be great to see like the next images right now, just for a short moment. So this is Christine Son Kim's current work, Every Life Science, here at Haus der Kunst. And yeah, you used words and moving image to create a rhythmic and both spatial and visual score, one could say. And in other works, can we say maybe see the next image? You're using musical notation to like visually express emotions or sensations, and they almost like unfold like a text that can be read. And yeah, so this is why I had this question in mind. And Jerome, in many of your audiovisual works, can we see the next image, please? And then also like the next one, I just want to give the, yeah, that's from impediment is information. It yeah, feels like text is like taking up space and almost also developing a like a certain rhythm. And I think also read in like one text that you wrote, like the text is the page is vibrating. So yeah, this is why I thought maybe that's a question that could like give some interesting answers.
Jerome, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you, Christine. And thank you, Elena and Sarah, for very kind words and for having me. And Christine, I'm so grateful to meet you and be here with you. And Beth, you as well. Thank you. Oh, and I'll give a short description of myself too. I'm Black and I have a beard and I'm wearing a light sky blue t-shirt, and there's a window behind me with some leaves. Yes, well, I think in that last image you showed, Elena, it speaks to something that I'm interested in, which is using writing. Oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm interested in exploring the borders between legibility and illegibility for different reasons. I find that as someone who stutters, their stuttering creates, for me, experiences of like it bears on how am I being understood, and complicates the distinction between being understood and not being understood, being legible, not being legible. Yes, that's one thing that I think I like to explore. And in that image, one of the reasons why is because that text that is overlaid on the clouds, in the color of the clouds, is a text that is Like it documents violence, but also documents resistance to violence. So part of why I was interested in making it both legible and illegible is because as a way of dealing with the ethical question of reproducing violence while also, like, should I not reproduce violent words, but should I reproduce words that celebrate resistance? So yeah, I'll pause there.
Wow. I'll go next, and similar to Jerome, Elena and Sarah, thank you for the introduction. And I'm also excited to have this conversation with you, Jerome, as well. I will describe myself as well. I've got a faded out blonde dye job, and I've got gold rimmed glasses, a linen light colored button up shirt. I'm at home which is a mostly white surface. You can see the interior space, and I work with Beth, the sign language interpreter. Oh, sorry, I should also say I'm Korean American. And then I'm going to describe Beth as well. She's a white woman. This is always so awkward. She's got maybe brown hair to her shoulders, and then she's got a dark gray backdrop and wearing a black button up, and she'll be interpreting for everyone for this conversation. So, Elena, your question about musicality, space, text, I really like what Jerome said about legibility. I think that parallels with how much people are willing to communicate, right? In that way, how much are you making yourself legible and easy to read? I think about how I use a lot of infographics in my work. And when I found myself doing that, it was because I realized it was paralleling my experience from being born deaf. So oftentimes I have these people in front of me who speak in a different language, oftentimes. And so I think about how text or sign language or body language, how much of that do I want to share in order to be understood? But what I like about infographics is that it doesn't require language. I think that matches body language communication. To me, I also find text or written language the most common ground between people I meet, because I don't read lips, I don't speak, people don't sign. And so text or written language is how we are able to meet each other in the middle. If we didn't have that, there wouldn't be much left. It would either require a complete reliance on sign language interpreters, right? And I also can't wait around for the world to stop being operated by hearing people and by speech. And so text allows me to play the game, so to speak. I got into sound about 10 years ago, and admittedly, I kind of looked at it like a game. At first, I thought I'd find myself really interested into music and sound, but that wasn't the case. I'm actually really interested in the gaming of sound and the game of sound. I like stepping into these worlds. I like using sound. I like navigating that. And it's just been a really interesting journey for me as well. And I think this is where I'll pause.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting what you're saying about this game between legibility and illegibility in your work. And it actually brings me really to my next question, because I wanted to talk about the captioning practice that you're experimenting with in a very poetic sense, and where I feel that what you're just described as also playing with the illegibility of words is very present, because I think usually captioning is rather considered as a one-to-one speech transcription and as a direct translation. And I think here you're opening up a metaphorical space. And I feel, Jerome, you're also similarly working with captioning. And I can we have maybe the next image? So this, I just want to say for the audience that these two images here are from Christine's recent work, Captioning the City, from in Manchester. And I feel here like the buildings itself become like a massive large-scale screen, and it seems like something like the unnoticed or something gets a space in a way. But I think this is something Christine will like speak very soon about it. But can we see the next image for Jerome for a second? Yeah, so this is from Jerome's work Transcripted, which was developed for the poetry project Marathon 2020, and where I also think that this idea of like legibility, what maybe captioning is usually used for in television or cinema, is kind of getting hijacked in a way, but at the same time maybe something that is seemingly unaudible gets visualized in a way. So yeah.
Sure, yeah. I think it just struck me that my practice does really overlap a lot with Jerome's. I think I'm still kind of processing that. I think I'm annoyed that I haven't met you sooner. Okay, so processing my response. With the Manchester International Festival, MIF as I would sign it, they reached out to me during the pandemic. And at that time, I just was thinking, well, if we're going to do something, let's go outside. And I kind of aimed high and I was like, I want to caption the city. And the team was like, sure, we can do that. They had a really great budget. It was really nice of them to agree to this. And so we were able to do that, caption the city, in addition to have a plane fly over the city with kind of like a banner behind it once or twice a day. And so it was around access. I think nowadays people struggle to understand what access means, on what level does it apply, at what price range does it exist. To me, access is so intertwined and interconnected with budgets, with money, and it can turn really ugly. Oftentimes I ask for access and the response is that they don't have the money for that. I don't know, what an uncomfortable experience. And I've already kind of gone through that my entire life. And so what I feel like oftentimes is missing from access is beauty. Like, why not make it beautiful? Because once it becomes beautiful, it's integrated, it's in society, it becomes an easier request to make, it becomes an easier request to fulfill. I think about this a lot. And also the idea of closed captions versus open captions, right? I don't like closed captions because it means that it's not defaulted. You have to search for it, you have to enable it. I think I saw some comment on Twitter. I forget who is the source. And so whoever it is, I apologize, but somebody's like, why not make it closable captions instead of closed captions? So what that means is, like, as a default, the captions are there from the beginning. You have to see them and bear witness to them. And then it's up to you whether to turn them off or keep them on. And for me, open caption also means that they are burned into the screen. That's everyone's definition. But what I really like about that is that you can't turn it off. And so I wanted to caption the city of Manchester and put it in people's faces for a week, that it was everywhere they looked. I like the idea of forcing our presence onto people, that people have to see us every day. I like that it's not a choice, because I don't want separate, if you will. I don't want us put to the side, because then we're easier to forget. I want us right next to you, shoulder to shoulder. And so I wanted to play around by being in people's faces. Like I said, I love games and I like being in people's faces, because what I find is that that leads itself to kind of being poetry. I don't know, I find captions can be poetry. And so my aim was to be in your face and to also be poetic. And I'll stop there.
Oh, I'm so so moved hearing you, Christine, watching you. And yes, I similarly this morning when I was spending time with your work, I was like, oh wow, this is just so much overlap, and it's so yeah, it's so moving to I've like received so much guidance from you even just this morning, and in starting to get to know your work. Yeah, and I really love what you say about being in people's faces, and the presence. I think I love seeing these images of the captions in the city. And what you said about access being beautiful. I think for me, for most of my life, I saw my stutter as something not beautiful, and like a burden, and something wrong, and something I need to get rid of, and a hassle and an obstacle. And I think for me, in order to now be in my play and in my work, and in the, I love you say about games too, and in the games that I'm trying to play with letters and sounds and things, I think I'm trying to one of the things I'm trying to do is to show so many of the beauties of stuttering. And I think that in some ways has required me to first see it as beautiful within myself before trying to show other people how beautiful it is. And with captioning, yeah, like in the image that you showed, Elena, yeah, I was thinking about like how like often when I'm stuttering, it sounds like I'm being silent. So like when I'm asked my name and then I'm stuttering on my name, it can sound to the other person, like the person who asked my name, it can sound like I'm just not speaking. But I am speaking. It just, the sound has not arrived yet in the way that we are, in a conventional way of hearing sound. Like sometimes I use the image of a river that goes underground. It's like when someone asks me my name and I'm stuttering and my mouth is open and there's no sound, it's like there is a river that's flowing, but it's underground. And then when I say my name, then the river comes above ground. And so I was thinking about that with captions too, how like if somebody were to caption my speaking, then one approach might be to, you know, have no words for when I'm speaking, and then once I start speaking, then the letters start happening. But I tried to say, like, represent the fact that it's not silence, or rather, I think silence and speaking are too crude of categories. So a row of 100 C's, you know, to me speaks more to my experience than blankness. And I'm thinking about the image that they showed earlier of your piece, Christine, with the P's. I think it's so beautiful, and I love it. One of the things I love about it is because I listened to your TED Talk where you were talking about the P in musical notation, that the P stands for piano, which stands for soft or quiet. But of course, a P is also a sound. And of course, in musical notation, the more P's you have stacked in a row, the quieter and quieter the sound is called for. So I love what, to me, the piece asked me this question, which is like, how quiet can you go? Like a kind of sonic game of limbo. But even if you have 1,000 P's, like imagine trying to play like 1,000 P's, you know, on a piano, it's still not silent, you know? So, yeah. So I'm grateful for the way that you invite me to think further and to think about things I have not thought about with regards to, that which I am not not sure how to say. So I'll pause here.
If I may, I'd like to add something to that. I want to comment on your kind of comments about quietness. I think that something that shows up is that we also have different senses of waiting. Like you were thinking about the time it takes to kind of hear you saying your name by the other person. And I'm sure that waiting period might feel uncomfortable, but the question is for who? For you or for the other person? And then also my sense of waiting is a delayed one, because I have to wait for the translation process, or I have to wait for somebody to focus differently. They can't speak, so they have to write it down. Well, that takes time. And so I just find that really interesting. And then I'm also thinking about how we have to carry the weight, you and I, of how people perceive us. Like you were saying, people look at you and think that you might be quiet. You're not. And the same thing for me is like, I am actually very loud. I love talking all day. I'll talk all day, all night. So when I sit there as a deaf person, unengaged, people are like, oh, she's deaf. What a pure soul, right? She has no sound to sully her. And it's like, what a weird thing, right? Like you and I have to carry the weight of all that. Plus, we're people of color, right? I can see that we have a lot of layers when it comes to waiting and when it comes to burden of being perceived and perception. And you and I just operate on a different sense of time.
Yes, thank you, Christine. Yeah, I'm so grateful for your words. Yeah. I mean, it's well, you mentioned time, and I want to come back to this because I want to ask you about clocks in your work. Specifically, there's this piece from well, there's two that I'm thinking about that I want to come back to, but I'm Yeah, I'm grateful for what you say about waiting and delay, and yeah, and what you say about race. I feel like there's this, because I'm also thinking about like the specific, as you said, like the specific ways in which we are called to bear certain weights, and I'm thinking about the different. I'm thinking about like different stereotypes and expectations of a Korean American woman and an African American man. Like for me, it's long been I've long been aware that like there's a there's a trope of like the dangerous Black man. And one of the ways that I then interact with that trope is one of the ways that I'm like invited to interact with that trope is through like through my voice. Like there's this story that I tell sometimes of this one time I was driving and I was on the highway and I was pulled over by a cop because my lights weren't on. I was driving a rental car, and it's this like situation where as soon as the cop comes around and I roll down the window, like I'm like one of my goals is to like present myself as unthreatening as possible, and then the like the form of waiting that you pointed to becomes like a really, for me it feels very risky because like the cop like started asking me like just questions like what are you carrying in the back, because it was a van, and I answered, and like we were having this conversation. I was not stuttering for more than like a second or two, so I was passing pretty well as fluent. But then the cop asked where I was going, and I could already feel like my name, like if I'm going to say where I'm actually going, like the name of the city, then I can already feel that I'm going to stutter on it for a few seconds. And I was like, okay, so am I going to take that risk? And I think again about your use of the word game, and because it felt to me like a gamble, because if I take the risk of saying where I'm actually going and I stutter on it, then even if I stutter for like 3 seconds, to me it's like the cop might then think that I'm lying, and then that might be cause for him to then say like, ask me to step out of the car, and then I'm starting to get nervous, and then I start to stutter more, and then he thinks I'm lying more, and then it's like, so I'm like, so I could tell the truth and say where I'm going and stutter and take the risk, or I could just lie and say a different place that I know I'm not going to stutter on. And I chose to stutter. And then there was this really interesting moment, because then I stuttered for a few seconds, and I just like looked him straight in the eye to see if I could tell if any suspicion arose, and I didn't see any. And then we talked for a little bit more, and then and then he left. And then as I was driving away, I was like, oh, I wonder if he has a stutter. It's possible, like I don't know. And like but it's like that those 3 seconds of waiting, to me, in that specific situation, become like extremely loaded. So I'm curious if you, I'm curious if you could speak more, if you would like, about, like intersections between, like race and who you are. Yeah.
So sharing that story as you just did, I felt the emotion and I could feel the multiple outcomes of that. Like it could have gone so many ways. And it's stupid, right? That you have to pick one way or another. Am I going to be honest and maybe owe an explanation, say that I'm disabled? And then coming back to the sense of gaming, you saying it was a gamble. I also see so many hearing people are just not comfortable with silence, I'll say, between people. Like sometimes people will engage with me because I'm writing to them or texting with them, and not everyone understands what's going on. Like, let me also clarify, I live in Germany, and it can be annoying because everyone's like, but don't you know English? And it's like, well, yeah, of course I do. But the stereotype is that they look at me as an Asian person who doesn't speak, so they assume I don't know English. And so I'm dealing with maybe doubts or incredulity around my knowing English just because I'm deaf and also Asian. What I find is using my deaf voice helps remove the silence. For whatever reason, people understand my vocalizations better. And so when I sign and I vocalize, people understand I'm deaf, but that's only once they hear my deaf voice. So for me, that's really interesting. Like I have to use my deaf voice to remove or push aside, so to speak, my Asian identity, because that has stereotypes, and then so does deafness, and then my womanhood, all of these things. I guess when I'm in a situation that maybe is higher stakes, an emergency, something like that, I will use my deaf voice because I find that people respond in a more helping manner. They'll be like, oh, whatever you need, right? Versus when I stay silent and don't use my deaf voice. It's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I'm curious. There was a piece of yours that I was looking at this morning, a photograph of it, and I couldn't see very clearly what was the text in the piece, but I saw that part of the text said, deaf rage, and I'm curious about how you interact with rage in your work.
Oh, Jerome. It's a good question. I will say in the beginning of my career, in the earlier years, I was always told, if you will, sometimes by teachers and professors and other people, they would just kind of observe or say to me that they don't feel any rage from me. It's like unprompted. Okay, what do you want, a performance about my rage? You know, but in response, I decided that I didn't like that and I wasn't going to talk about it. I felt like even just talking about my deafness alone changes the conversation. It's about barriers and struggles and frustrations, and that's not really what I wanted to do, which is why I think I went so mainstream to speak, like a little fake optimism in a way. And what I will say is it's been a journey and I love where I am now because I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit, but I'm now in a place where I can talk about rage. And rage is really prevalent in my community for a lot of reasons. But I also have experienced that it's really hard to explain that to people who aren't deaf. How do you explain rage to somebody who doesn't experience oppression, right? Like, it's different than anger. Anger is a response to a specific situation, a one-off. Rage is an accumulation of years of instances. It has layers, it has depth. And I got to a place where I felt like my platform had grown big enough where I could feel established enough to share this. And quite frankly, I was surprised at how people responded. It was positive for the most part. I would say for years, I didn't feel like the timing was right. And I also didn't really have a sense of how to share it until I was able to find a few ways to do so. How about you? I mean, if you have any rage, Jerome, like, how do you express it in your work? Not to demand that from you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Christine, and for asking. Yeah, I really resonate with and appreciate the way you speak about anger and how it is different from rage. I think I find it hard for myself to hard to contact or find or even know, like, contact or find my own rage, or to even know if I feel it or have it, or I think I'm still working on that. I think more when you speak about accumulation, I think the emotion that comes to mind that feels akin to that for me is just like despair. That's an emotion that I feel more in touch with, and more capable of exploring in my work and my play. I think one way, I mean, going back to the image that Elena shared of the screenshot from my computer screen, and there were, those rows of letters. I mean, I think just one way of dancing with that despair and honoring it and expressing it is through repetition. Which I've never really thought about that before, but I think, like, in this moment I'm thinking about, like the act of just holding down the C key and watching all the C's fill the page, for me has been about finding more accuracy in captioning my own speech, but also just the accumulation of C's, to me, speaks to the accumulation that you speak about with rage, and to me, accumulation of sadness and hopelessness that to me comes to despair. And in music too, I find I feel very drawn. I love to play the piano, and when I play the piano, I I laugh at myself because I tend to really focus on the bottom half of the piano, to the point where I just put the bench on the left side of the piano. I very rarely play the higher notes, because there's something about the lower notes that, to me, I can get into this place where I feel like I'm the music starts to be oceanic, in a way. And what happens is that, of course, the lower notes on the piano are, they have, the way that the piano is working is that the lower notes, they hold a lot of frequencies. I'm thinking of your beautiful image at the beginning with the word frequency, and those low notes, like I can like feel them like rattle my body, and the way that the piano starts to vibrate, and it can really be very cathartic for me, to just hammer on those low notes. So I think that's another way. And in general, creating sound that feels oceanic in some way really speaks to the despair. Yeah.
I don't know if Christine wanted to continue. It was a very nice flow, so I could also listen endlessly. And I
did have another question too, though. but I don't want to interrupt you, Elena. So you can go ahead. But I did want to ask about the clocks. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask Christine about, there were these two pieces of yours that I saw this morning that were both in the shapes of clocks. And I'm also thinking about other times I've seen circles in your work, whether they're in Venn diagrams or the pie chart about why you're hearing daughter signs. And I wanted to just ask about, like circles, like your relationship to circles, relationship to clocks, time. And I'll just say that one thing that I felt in seeing your two pieces that were that felt to me, I don't want to assume, but it felt to me in conversation with clocks was, it felt like one of the things that it made me think about was, how can we reimagine time, and how can the clock offer offer new new invitations to relate to time. Yes, thank you. I think this is so beautiful.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Do you have any maybe close-ups of this, Elena? Or any close-ups of my other clockwork?
No,
No, that's all right. I'll be able to explain. Just I thought if there was a quick shortcut to it. But what you do is you see a white wall, and there are two words, one word turning, the other word clock. And this is a mural. And what you do is you see the hand shape, which is the number 2 in French, because American Sign Language has its origins with French Sign Language. Perfect. So 1, 2. So you see 1, 2. And in American Sign Language, this is how you speak about turn taking. So now it's my turn, and then it's your turn, and then it's my turn again, or it's their turn, and then it's their turn, your turn. And so we speak about turn taking in that way. And so this was a comment on social justice and the responsibility and the weight of responsibility. I think it's kind of foolish or silly to see people who are defining what's normal being the ones who put the barriers in place. And then they're also the ones telling us to do all the work. when they're the ones who put the barriers on us. And so it's like, no, I think we should take turns. That way we ensure that there isn't burnout on the marginalized groups that are doing the labor. And so, Jerome, you speaking of it having a clock-like look, brings me to some of the work that I've been doing recently about echo traps. In my deaf life, it's just full of echoes. Like Beth is repeating what I'm saying, she's echoing me. When I ask somebody to write what they've just tried to say to me, that's an echo. There's a lot of repetition. Captions are the same thing. My educational system has been conducted mostly through interpreters, so that also relates to delay. And so for me, clocks are also echo traps, which bring you to a circular experience. And that also kind of speaks to what people look and define as normal. Also, people are trapped in not wanting to change, not being open to new ideas. What is said as normal is what gets trapped as normal. And I am only speaking generally at this point, but what I see as a Western perspective of time usually comes with markings of it, right? So there's lunchtime, there's time to ring the bells for church, right? There's time to feed the cows. And there's all these ways to mark time, but time must be marked, whether that's numbers on a clock or something else. And again, I'm only speaking really generally. And then for an Eastern sense of time, of course, there's temples and things like that. But if you're familiar with the practice of like wind chimes and how that creates the sound of time passing. And so when you hear wind chimes, you're not thinking, oh, it's 3 o'clock, right? You're not marking it. You're not thinking that it's a certain time of day. You're just recognizing that the day is progressing, that it's happening. And I think that it's really great that there's an abstract sense of time. The day is moving on versus a very marked way of looking at time, like it's time to feed the kids. And so, Jerome, your questions about thinking about new ways of time, I totally agree. But I also wonder, where does it end, right? Like I need structure to work. I tell myself, okay, Christine, you have to finish by 1, and that gets me going. But if I don't have a structure to time, who knows? I might find myself emerging 5 days later. What are you hoping for, Jerome? Like what would be a great experience for a new timeline for you?
Oops. Oh, yes. Yeah, thank you, Christine. I think, yeah. Oh, it's such a wonderful question. Thinking. There's this recording of Amazing Grace on Aretha Franklin's album, Amazing Grace, from 1972, from a live performance that she gave in Los Angeles. And I love this recording so much, and she practices melisma, you know, this musical practice of where you have a syllable and you sing multiple notes on that syllable, you know. So instead of Amazing Grace, it's Amazing Grace. This like stretching of the syllable, and I find there's so much there that she offers. And when I reflect on your question, like I feel like I'm interested in time, there being room for everyone to get what they need in time, and whether that's structure or a more fluid sense, or of course, like I also need both, and my needs for time change throughout the day and throughout my life and from moment to moment. But I think one of the things I'm craving is like yeah, for everyone to have what they need, and for there to be room for multiplicity. I like when I hear this recording of Aretha Franklin singing, I hear the congregation, and the congregation, it's amazing. It's like people in the congregation know the words, and so there's this pleasure that arises from Aretha knows that they know the words, and so like she'll spend like 10 seconds on one syllable, and then she like crashes like a wave into the next syllable, and you can hear the congregation receive the wave. And there's such a, like when I listen to it, there's such a spaciousness to it, that I also feel like when I look at the turning clock too, I feel, as opposed to a traditional clock with all these little lines. So I think one of the things that I'm envisioning is, a way of taking care of time, that somehow enables everyone to get what they need.
Yeah, I think, wow, that was a really great conversation. It's already 8. I would love to like continue, but I think we should maybe open up to the audience at this point. Besides, like Christina, Jerome, you have like the urgency to address another topic, but I feel that was meandering around so many themes.
I'm happy to receive audience questions.
Same.
Okay. It seems so far there are no questions. Or does everyone know how to like write in the chat? Or maybe Sarah has a question. So on the bottom of your like Zoom window, there's this chat function. And yeah, you could type in a question in case there are some. Otherwise, I think we would like let Sarah speak who has a question.
Actually, well, I don't have a question, but I will just say that I really enjoyed the conversation, Christine and Jerome. Thank you. And You really talked in depth about a lot of the ideas that Eleanor and I had discussed when talking about this talk. So it was really, really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can also only agree to that. That it was like a very enriching experience, and I'm super grateful that you shared all this knowledge and time, as we speak about time, with us also. And Beth, also a huge thank you to you for your work here. Yeah. And yeah, so I thank everyone also who joined tonight, or depends wherever you are. And yeah, hope you also take away so much as I am from this conversation.
Thank you so much for hosting this event and organizing this. This was really special to me.
Thank you, Christine.
Jerome, so nice to meet you. So nice to meet you, Sarah. And well, rather good to see you, Elena. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Christine. So good to meet you. Thank you, Beth, for all of your interpreting. And Elena and Sarah, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, Jerome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.